The first time I met Francine Zeller, she was measuring my front lawn with a pink tape measure, muttering about uniformity violations. I had just moved into my new place 2 weeks earlier. Still unpacking boxes, still figuring out where the light switches were. But Francine? She already had my name printed on a clipboard. I should have known then. See, I'm Gregory Gaines, 48, former paramedic. Got taken out of the field after a busted shoulder and 2 spinal surgeries from a highway rollover I'll never forget. I walk with a cane now, and when I'm tired or the weather turns, I need my wheelchair ramp. Not a fancy one, just a sturdy aluminum setup that folds out from the side of my porch. Medicare helped cover it. Francine didn't care about any of that. "You're lowering the neighborhood's value," she said the first time she saw me roll down my ramp. "This isn't a trailer park, Gregory." I stared at her, stunned. "What did you just say?" She turned on her heel and strutted off in her kitten heels like she'd just given a TED Talk. Later that week, I got a violation notice in my mailbox. Official HOA letterhead. A fine for unauthorized structural addition. That ramp. I called the number listed and got Francine herself. "Of course. It's a safety accommodation," I told her, trying to keep my voice steady. "You can't fine me for that." She laughed. Actually laughed. "You didn't get it pre-approved. It's not about the disability rules or rules." But it was about the disability. She didn't even try to hide it. When I asked for the HOA's architectural committee policy, she told me I could file a request at the next meeting, which, surprise, she chaired. I spent that week gathering paperwork, doctor's letters, ADA documentation, even a signed note from the city's building inspector. I showed up to the meeting in my wheelchair, ramp set up in the back of my truck like a trophy. The room had maybe 12 residents. Francine sat at the head table, gavel in hand like she was Judge Judy. She didn't even let me talk. Per HOA guidelines, she said, no exterior modifications may be made without prior written approval. This includes ramps, regardless of purpose. A guy behind me whispered, "You're kidding me, right?" I turned to see an older Navy vet I'd met once at the mailbox. He gave me a nod. I turned back to Francine. "This violates the Americans with Disabilities Act." Francine waved her hand like she was brushing off a fly. "We're a private association. ADA doesn't apply." That's when I knew this wasn't just ignorance. It was targeted. I stood up, or tried to. My leg buckled, and I leaned hard on the cane. The room went quiet. "You want to play legal games?" I said. "Fine. Let's play." The next day, I filed a formal discrimination complaint with the State Housing Authority. I mailed a second complaint to the Department of Justice. I even called a disability rights attorney I found online who offered a free consult. He was more excited than I was. "You've got a textbook case," he told me. "They're violating both state and federal law. And if they've done this to you, I guarantee they've done it to others." I started digging. Public records, old meeting minutes, archived HOA newsletters on the community website. Turns out Francine had rejected 4 other accessibility requests in the past 3 years. One woman wanted a handrail for her porch steps. Another guy, a diabetic amputee, asked to widen his driveway for a van with a lift. All denied. I went door to door, talking to people who'd been too intimidated to fight. One woman, Rosa, broke down crying when I told her what I was doing. She said she'd been threatened with eviction for putting up a temporary wheelchair ramp while her husband recovered from surgery. "You're not alone," I told her. By the end of the week, I had 6 sworn statements. Francine must have sensed something was coming, because 2 days later, I got another violation notice, this time for leaving trash bins visible for more than 30 minutes after pickup. My bins weren't even out. I installed cameras. Motion activated. High def. One on the porch, one pointed at the driveway. Sure enough, 2 nights later, a grainy silhouette walked onto my property and tilted my bins just enough to make them visible. 5 minutes later, Francine's car pulled up, headlights off. Gotcha. I forwarded the footage to my lawyer. He added it to the growing discrimination case. Then, things got weird. My mailbox was knocked off its post. Twice. My porch light was unscrewed, left dangling by a wire. One morning, I found a dead squirrel inside my wheelchair ramp bag. Each time, I called the police. Each time, they made a report but told me they couldn't prove anything. No witnesses, they said. That's when I had an idea. If Francine wanted to treat my ramp like it was an eyesore, maybe I'd show her what a real violation looked like. I waited for the next HOA meeting. This time, I didn't go inside. I parked across the street from her house, yes. She held meetings inside her own home, claiming the clubhouse was under renovation, and unfolded my ramp right onto her pristine front lawn. Then I wheeled out a big, custom-printed sign that said, "Disability access denied here." I waited. Neighbors started showing up for the meeting. One by one, they read the sign. Some took pictures. People whispered. A few shook my hand. Francine burst out of the house in minutes, red-faced and furious. "You can't park here," she shrieked. "You're trespassing." "It's a public sidewalk," I said. "And my ramp's not even touching your property line. Just like you said at the last meeting, rules are rules." She pointed at the sign. "Take that down." I didn't move. Just sat there in my chair, arms crossed. "You mocked my disability," I said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You denied me access. You broke the law. Now, the law is coming for you." She started to respond, but then she saw the police cruiser pull up behind my truck. Someone had called them. Turned out it was my lawyer. He stepped out of the cruiser, smiling. "Evening, folks. We're just here to serve MS. Zeller with a court summons." "Gregory, I believe this is yours." He handed me a copy of the civil complaint. The look on Francine's face? Worth every second. Francine didn't show up at the next HOA meeting. Her absence wasn't mentioned. No explanation offered, no apology read aloud by a flustered board member. Just a sudden change in venue to the community recreation center, as if someone had flipped a switch and decided her reign as queen of the cul-de-sac was over. The turnout was double what it had been. Folding chairs filled up, neighbors stood leaning against the back wall, and a few even brought their teenagers. For once, people weren't there for free coffee and passive head nodding. They wanted answers. I sat near the front, not in the center but close enough. My presence didn't need an introduction. Everyone had seen the sign. Most had seen the video too. It had made its way around the neighborhood Facebook group, uploaded quietly by someone I didn't know, captioned simply, "Our HOA president, caught in the act." When the new interim chair, a soft-spoken librarian named Miriam, took her place at the table, she cleared her throat and shuffled a stack of papers. "We're aware of the recent situation involving former President Zeller," she began. "Due to pending legal matters, we are not permitted to comment on specific allegations. However, we are implementing a full review of all accessibility-related decisions made in the past 5 years." A murmur spread through the room. I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. After the meeting, a man I didn't recognize approached me outside. He was tall, with sun-worn skin and a limp that suggested a history not unlike my own. "I'm Lionel," he said. "I own the place over on East Grove, near the back gate." I nodded. "She turned down my permit to build a ramp too. Said it would clash with the neighborhood's aesthetic." I didn't fight it. "My wife's been helping me up the stairs since." "Not anymore," I said. "Submit your paperwork again. Copy it to Miriam directly. They're not blocking it this time." Lionel hesitated. "You sure?" I looked him in the eye. "They're being watched now." The lawsuit had done more than rattle Francine's nest. It had stirred up years of quiet resentment. People who'd been fined for paint shades that were 2 degrees off, for planting flowers taller than regulation height, for parking in their own driveways during holidays, they were all coming forward now. And the more they spoke, the more it became clear. Francine's grip on the HOA hadn't been about rules. It had been about control. I didn't need to spread the word. The neighborhood did it for me. A week later, I received a certified letter. The envelope was thick, sealed tightly, and stamped with the insignia of a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a notice. Francine Zeller, through her personal counsel, was offering a settlement. It wasn't small. A generous 5-figure sum, phrased carefully as a gesture of reconciliation and goodwill. There was also a non-disclosure agreement, 3 pages long, filled with clauses designed to ensure I'd never speak of the incident again. I turned the letter over twice, then slid it into a drawer and closed it. At our next legal strategy meeting, my attorney leaned forward in his seat. "She's scared," he said. "She thinks if this goes to trial, she's going to lose more than money." "I'm not interested in a payout," I said. "I want a precedent." He nodded. Then we pushed forward. Depositions were scheduled. The process was slow, tedious, and full of games. Francine's attorney filed motions to delay, claimed medical hardship, even tried to argue that HOA board members were protected under a form of sovereign immunity. That one got laughed out of court, but it told us something important. She wasn't just worried about the lawsuit. She was worried about what else we might uncover. And then we did. While reviewing HOA meeting transcripts, my attorney's paralegal flagged something odd from 3 years earlier, a variance approved for a contractor to build a wrought iron fence around a home on Morningview Lane. The fence was taller than regulations allowed, but the approval had been fast-tracked. No member vote, no inspection, just a rubber stamp from the chair. The contractor's name? Zeller's eldest son. We dug deeper. Found 2 more contracts: landscaping, storm drain maintenance, both awarded without competitive bids. One went to a company registered to Francine's cousin. The other to her goddaughter's husband. We compiled everything. Invoices, permits, dates. It painted a clear picture. Francine had been using her position to funnel HOA funds into her own circle, bypassing procedure and violating fiduciary responsibility. We amended the lawsuit. Now it wasn't just about discrimination. It was about fraud. Word spread fast. The next HOA meeting was standing room only. Local reporters showed up, cameras in hand. Miriam looked overwhelmed but determined. She opened the floor for community questions, and the line formed instantly. The first speaker was a single mother who'd been fined over a plastic kiddie pool. The next was a man fined for putting solar panels on his roof, panels that had later saved the neighborhood during a blackout. Each story was different, but the theme was the same: abuse of authority under the guise of policy enforcement. When my turn came, I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. "I'm not here to rant," I said. "I'm here to remind you that we live in a community. A real one. And communities don't build ramps just for people like me. They build them so nobody gets left behind." Applause was quiet but steady. After the meeting, I returned home to find a note taped to my door. Handwritten, unmarked envelope. It said simply, "She's been sneaking into the records room. Nights, Saturdays. Might want to check the security footage." I didn't recognize the handwriting. I forwarded the tip to my attorney. He pulled security logs from the community center. They showed Francine's fob being used at odd hours, midnights, early mornings. Always alone. We subpoenaed the internal camera footage. Bingo. Francine had been removing files, scanning them, and replacing them with edited versions. One video showed her feeding documents into a shredder. Another showed her replacing permit files with fresh printouts, dates changed, signatures missing. We took it to the judge. An emergency hearing was scheduled. Francine was ordered to surrender all personal devices. Her home office was searched. Investigators found 2 flash drives hidden inside a hollowed-out dictionary on her bookshelf. And that's when her attorney quit. The judge, now furious, expanded the scope of the case. Francine was stripped of any remaining HOA authority. A special administrator was appointed to conduct a full forensic audit of the HOA's finances. Meanwhile, neighbors started organizing. Lionel got his ramp approved within 48 hours. Rose's husband was reimbursed for the temporary ramp they'd been forced to remove. The board established a new accessibility committee made up of residents with medical backgrounds, veterans, and disability advocates. I was named chair. We rewrote the bylaws, introduced transparency policies, required all future board meetings to be recorded and published online. Every vote documented. Every expenditure logged. Francine's house went up for sale 2 months later. No open house. No goodbye. Just a moving van that arrived at dawn and was gone by noon. The morning after she left, someone left a small bouquet of daisies on my porch. No note. Just flowers. I never found out who it was. But I didn't need to. 2 weeks after Francine Zeller disappeared from the neighborhood like a ghost in pearls, the community felt different. Not just quieter, but lighter, like someone had finally cracked a window in a stuffy attic. There was a kind of cautious optimism in the air, the kind people don't talk about directly but show in little ways, leaving their porch lights on a bit longer, waving to neighbors they used to avoid, even letting their kids ride scooters on the sidewalk again without worrying about citations for noise disturbances. I didn't expect the ripple effect to last, but it did. By the time the special administrator finished the preliminary audit of the HOA finances, the findings were presented in a public meeting that filled every seat, and then some. People stood along the walls with their arms folded, jaws tight, waiting to hear just how deep the rot had gone. Miriam stood at the front with the administrator, a retired tax attorney named Alvin Sorrell, who looked like he hadn't smiled since the Clinton administration. He adjusted his glasses and read from a summary document with no dramatic flair, just cold precision. Over the last 6 years, a pattern of unauthorized expenditures has been identified, including payments to non-licensed contractors, overlapping invoices, and unrecorded cash withdrawals from the HOA's discretionary maintenance fund. The total amount in question exceeds $86,000. There were gasps. Someone let out a low whistle. No one said a word for several seconds. Lionel leaned over from the row behind me. You think she thought no one would ever look? She didn't think she'd ever lose, I said. Alvin continued, methodically listing the violations: unapproved landscaping contracts, duplicate payments to shell companies, even a consulting fee paid to a firm that didn't appear to exist in any business registry. All roads led back to Francine's tenure. When the floor opened for questions, no one asked how it happened. They only wanted to know what would be done now. Alvin explained that the HOA's insurance carrier would be filing a subrogation claim against Francine's assets, and that further civil proceedings were likely. Criminal charges were also being evaluated by the county's fraud division. But the real shift came afterward, when people gathered in clusters outside the rec center. For the first time, neighbors who had spent years avoiding eye contact were talking freely, sharing stories that had been locked behind fences and front doors for too long. I saw a group of younger residents forming a circle around a woman named Denise who I'd only known in passing. She was holding a manila folder and speaking with a kind of urgency, like she'd finally been given permission to say something she'd been holding in for years. I approached as she was finishing, and when I asked why my petition to open a small daycare from my home was denied, she told me that certain households weren't the right fit for that kind of business. I didn't understand what she meant until I learned that 2 other women, both white, had been approved for the same thing the year before. Someone asked her if she still had the rejection letter. Denise tapped her folder. Every word. I nodded toward it. Want to add that to the committee archive? She glanced at me. You keeping a record of all this? Every statement. Every document. We're building a formal case history. She handed it over, and just like that, the archive grew. Over the next several weeks, I spent hours talking to residents who'd kept their heads down for too long. A single father who'd been fined for leaving his garage door open while unloading groceries. A middle-aged woman who was threatened with a lien because she installed a flagpole bracket without filling out the right form despite the bracket being there when she bought the house. Miriam and I worked late into the evenings, stacking files, scanning documents, categorizing every incident. The Accessibility Committee had become more than a watchdog. It was a restoration project, a community memory bank. One afternoon, I was loading my printer with legal-size paper when my neighbor from 2 doors down, a quiet guy named Tarek, rang the bell. He was holding a plastic storage bin. I found these in my attic, he said. My wife used to be the HOA secretary before Francine pushed her out. Meeting notes, old rosters, financial logs. Thought you might want him. Inside were 5 spiral notebooks, 2 flash drives, and a binder labeled Architectural Complaints 2015. I opened one notebook. The handwriting was clean and dense, with detailed minutes of meetings that hadn't been digitized. One entry caught my eye. March 3, 2015 board discussion installing speed bumps. Francine opposes due to aesthetic concerns, but later approves budget allocation for road safety upgrades. No record of implementation. I flipped forward. June 18, 2015 motion to limit yard signs during election season. Francine abstains, then instructs secretary to issue warnings to homes with opposing candidate signage. I looked up at Tarek. Your wife took good notes. He grinned. She's a forensic accountant. You want the originals? I nodded. Absolutely. That night, I created the Community Oversight Archive, a public digital repository updated weekly with everything we'd collected. Each entry was tagged, time-stamped, and cross-referenced. Within days, people were submitting their own stories online, uploading letters, fines, even audio clips from heated HOA encounters. Then, something unexpected happened. A local journalist reached out. She'd been tipped off by a cousin who lived in the neighborhood and wanted to do a feature on what she called grassroots justice in suburbia. I was skeptical, but she came by, asked thoughtful questions, and didn't sensationalize a thing. Her article ran under the headline, "The Ramp That Changed a Neighborhood." It went viral in the county. 3 days later, I got a call from the Office of the State Attorney General. They were opening a formal investigation into HOA abuse of authority across multiple counties, and they wanted to use our neighborhood as a case study. I agreed on one condition. No names get buried. No settlements in secret. If someone broke the law, they need to answer for it. The investigator, a sharp-voiced woman named Ellen, promised transparency. "We're not here to patch holes," she said. "We're here to tear down rotten boards." The next few weeks blurred into interviews, depositions, and digital file transfers. I handed over the entire archive. Ellen's team requested more. We gave them everything. By early spring, subpoenas were issued for several former board members who'd rubber-stamped Francine's approvals. One tried to claim coercion. Another fled the state. But the evidence didn't lie. Financial trails, email chains, and timestamps painted a story none of them could escape. Meanwhile, the neighborhood kept building. Lionel's ramp was finished and painted by a group of neighbors who volunteered over a weekend. Rose's husband sent me a gift basket with a card that said, "No one ever fought for us before." Denise opened her daycare, and it filled up in 2 weeks. I never asked for recognition, but one morning, I found a plaque mounted on the side of the community clubhouse. It read, "In honor of those who refuse to be silenced. May this place reflect the people who live in it." No signature, just words. A few days later, Miriam stopped by with a folder. "We're rewriting the bylaws," she said. "Not just to fix things, but to protect people." Inside were drafts of new clauses, guaranteed accessibility rights, mandatory transparency reports, resident voting on all contracts, and term limits for board members. At the bottom of the draft was a new article, the right to challenge. It guaranteed that any resident could challenge a board decision without fear of retaliation. I added one line beneath it. "No person shall be denied dignity for the sake of conformity." Miriam smiled when she read it. "Sounds like you found your new job." I shook my head. "I'm retired, remember?" But the truth was, I'd never worked harder in my life. And for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was just living in a house. I felt like I belonged in a neighborhood. The spring cleanup day arrived with more rakes than rules. Under the newly reformed HOA, now operating with actual transparency and a rotating leadership structure, the annual community maintenance event had been transformed. Gone were the days of mandatory attendance slips and passive-aggressive clipboard checking. This year, it looked more like a neighborhood reunion. People smiled without suspicion. Kids helped bag leaves. Someone even set up a lemonade table with a jar labeled "Voluntary Donations for the New Community Garden." I parked myself under the old oak near the clubhouse, stacking paperwork for the Accessibility Committee's review of the final round of requested home modifications. The committee had grown to 6 residents, each with a different background: an occupational therapist, a retired carpenter, a public school counselor, and a young man who'd once been denied a ramp for his mother's walker. They weren't bureaucrats, they were neighbors, and that made all the difference. As I looked over the last application, a request to widen a path between 2 houses to accommodate a scooter, I noticed a familiar name listed as the adjacent property owner, Harold Dinsley. He'd been quiet during most of the turmoil but had voted against the reform bylaws at the last meeting. The application included a letter from him, objecting to the change on the grounds that he preferred the original lot layout and did not wish to encourage excessive foot traffic. I flagged it and leaned back. A shadow crossed my lap. "Mind if I sit?" It was Lionel, holding 2 paper cups of black coffee. He handed me one before settling onto the bench beside me with a long sigh. "You look like you just read a letter from someone who still thinks this place runs on fear," he said. "I did," I replied. "Harold's trying to block an accessibility path." Lionel took a sip, then watched a trio of teenagers drag a broken picnic table toward the edge of the cul-de-sac. "Some folks don't know how to exist in a neighborhood that doesn't bend to their comfort," he said. "They think fairness is a threat." I nodded once. "I'll talk to him." Quietly. "I'd pay to see that conversation," Lionel said. Later that week, I knocked on Harold's door. He opened it wearing a pressed button-down and slippers that looked untouched by dirt. His eyes flicked to the folder in my hand and narrowed. "I know why you're here," he said. "Then you know it's not a fight," I replied. "Just a conversation." He hesitated, then stepped aside. 5 minutes. His house was spotless. Every coaster perfectly aligned, every cushion symmetrical. He didn't offer me a seat, so I remained standing by the foyer. "I saw your letter," I said. "I wanted to hear your concerns firsthand." "I'm not against the applicant," he said. "I've lived next to them for 9 years. They're good people, but I don't want this to become a trend." "What trend?" "Paving over yards. Cutting through property lines. Turning everything into a walkway." I opened the folder and held up the diagram. The path wouldn't touch your lawn. It would follow the existing utility easement. No fences removed, no trees cut. He crossed his arms. And if the next person wants to put up a ramp that stretches across 3 yards, then we discuss it when it happens. But we don't punish someone now for what someone else might ask later. He didn't respond. I waited. Finally, he asked, "Is this like what happened with Francine?" "No," I said. "That was about abuse. This is about inclusion." He looked down, then nodded once. "Leave the folder. I'll withdraw the objection." Back outside, the sun had dipped low, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. I walked home slowly, thinking about how much easier it had been to knock on Harold's door than it would have been a year ago. Not because he was friendlier now, but because the climate had changed. People were no longer afraid to be heard. That weekend, the committee approved the path. The following month, I received an invitation. The Office of the State Attorney General was holding a public panel on HOA abuse and reform, and they wanted me to share our neighborhood's experience. The event would be part of a broader initiative to educate communities and push for legislation requiring oversight for private associations. I agreed, but only if they let me bring someone else. So I brought Miriam. The auditorium was half filled with city officials, nonprofit executives, and concerned residents from across the state. When it was our turn, I took the podium briefly, just long enough to read one paragraph. "This is not a story about a ramp," I said. "It's a story about what happens when power is unchecked and when communities forget that rules should serve people, not the other way around." Then I stepped aside and let Miriam speak. She talked about the reforms, the new committees, the shared leadership model. She explained how transparency had changed everything, how publishing meeting minutes and disclosing financial decisions had restored trust that people didn't even realize they'd lost. Afterward, a woman approached us. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, a tired set to her jaw. "I'm from Crestwood Oaks," she said. "Our HOA fined my father for planting a garden in his backyard. They said it was unauthorized land use. He was growing vegetables for the food bank." Miriam handed her a card. "Start with your bylaws," she said. "Then call a meeting. You'll be surprised how many people have been waiting for someone to speak up." The woman nodded, eyes glassy. Back home, the neighborhood continued to evolve. The once blank wall of the clubhouse now bore a mural painted by local high schoolers depicting homes of all shapes and sizes, ramps and all, with the words, "Welcome means everyone," painted across the top. One afternoon, as I rolled down my own ramp to collect the mail, I noticed something new across the street. A small wooden plaque had been staked into the grass of a new neighbor's yard. It read, "Accessibility is not an upgrade. It's a foundation." I smiled. Later that evening, Lionel stopped by with a clipboard and a sheepish grin. "Don't throw anything at me," he said. "But we're nominating you to run for the advisory board." "Absolutely not," I said, laughing. "Too late. Petition's already got 30 signatures." He handed me the clipboard. The top name was Denise. Below hers were names I hadn't seen on anything official until now: Tarek, Rosa, the retired carpenter from the committee, even Harold. I looked at Lionel. "You sure they know what they're signing up for?" "They do," he said. "They want someone who remembers what it took to get here." I didn't answer right away. Instead, I walked over to my ramp, ran a hand along the rail, and looked back at the house that had once been a battleground. Now it was just home. I turned to Lionel, holding the clipboard loosely. "I'll consider it, but only if you're running for treasurer." He groaned dramatically. "I hate numbers." "You'll manage." That night, I sat out on the porch, not to watch for trouble, but just to watch. Kids rode bikes past the corner. Neighbors waved during their evening walks. Porch lights flicked on one by one, not as warnings, but as invitations. And somewhere in the distance, the quiet whir of a power drill echoed as someone else finished building their own ramp without fear, without permit battles, without shame. Just a neighbor, making their house a little more like home. And this time, no one had a problem with it.